The darkness of space lit up with thousands of weapon blasts as two massive fleets tore each other apart in the Andorian sector. Red energy beams crossed paths with blue plasma bolts. The sound of war echoed through the void as metal crashed against metal, and shields sparked with dying light. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the battle unfold before him. His four eyes tracked the movement of enemy ships while his scaled hands gripped the command rail. The Corvan Empire had sent 847 warships to this fight. Each one carried thousands of warriors ready to die for their cause. The enemy fleet spread out across the asteroid field like angry insects. Fleet Commander Zilmoth of the Thel Confederation commanded 623 vessels. Their ships moved with sharp angles and bright lights. Every Thel ship carried weapons that could crack a planet in half. This war had raged for 3 long years. Millions of soldiers had died on both sides. Entire star systems had been reduced to burning rocks floating in space. Neither empire could claim victory. Neither empire could accept defeat. Lieutenant Yunho worked at his sensor station on the Corvan flagship. His young face showed worry as he tracked incoming missiles. The screens around him flashed red and yellow warnings. Enemy torpedoes streaked toward their ship like metal bullets seeking flesh. The bridge shook as impacts hit their shields. Sparks flew from damaged control panels. The smell of burning electronics filled the air. Captain Minseok shouted orders to his crew as they fought to keep their ship alive. On the other side of the battle, Commander Ji Woo watched from his heavy cruiser as Corvan fighters engaged Thel interceptors. The small ships danced between the larger vessels like deadly birds. Some exploded in bright flashes. Others spun out of control, trailing fire and debris. The asteroid field made the fighting even more dangerous. Massive rocks floated between the fleets, creating a maze of death. Ships had to navigate carefully or risk crashing into stone that had existed since the birth of the galaxy. Some captains used the asteroids as cover. Others found them to be their graves. Captain Taehyung commanded a Thel battlecruiser at the front of his formation. His ship carried the biggest guns in the Confederation fleet. When they fired, the entire vessel shook from the power. The energy beams could punch through any armor known to exist. His crew worked with perfect timing born from years of war. Gunners loaded fresh power cells while engineers rerouted energy from damaged systems. Medical teams rushed to help wounded soldiers. Everyone knew their job and did it without question. The communications officer Su Jin on the Corvan side tried to coordinate the attack on enemy positions. Her voice carried orders across the fleet even as explosions rocked her ship. She had been fighting this war since it started. Her family lived on one of the planets these fleets were fighting to control. Engineer Wonshik worked deep inside a Corvan destroyer, fixing damage from enemy fire. Sweat ran down his face as he welded broken pipes and replaced burned circuits. The engine room was hot and filled with smoke. But the engines had to keep running or his ship would become a target that could not fight back. Above them all, the battle continued to grow more violent. A Thel dreadnought broke apart under concentrated fire from 5 Corvan cruisers. Its death lit up the darkness like a small sun. The explosion sent metal fragments flying in all directions. Some pieces were large enough to damage other ships. Pilot Sohyun flew her fighter through the chaos trying to protect the larger Thel ships. Her squadron had started the day with 12 pilots. Now only 4 remained. The others had been shot down or crashed into asteroids while dodging enemy fire. She rolled her small ship between 2 massive Corvan battleships. Their point defense guns tried to track her movement, but she was too fast. Her own weapons fired short bursts at their shield generators. Every hit was a small victory in a war measured by such moments. The Corvan fleet pushed forward trying to break through Thel lines. Their ships moved in perfect formation despite the destruction around them. Admiral Vextar had planned this attack for months. Everything depended on reaching the enemy command ships. Fleet Commander Zilmoth saw the enemy advance and ordered his forces to fall back to secondary positions. His flagship turned slowly while smaller ships provided cover. The Thel Confederation had fought the Corvan Empire for generations. This battle would not be their last. Communications Officer Hirin on the Thel flagship sent new orders to all ships in the fleet. Her words were calm despite the danger. She had seen many battles but never one this large. The fate of 7 star systems hung in the balance. Captain Na-Yun commanded a Thel dreadnought at the center of the formation. Her ship was one of the largest ever built. It carried enough firepower to destroy entire cities. But even she felt small in this massive battle. The fighting had created a field of wreckage between the 2 fleets. Broken ships drifted like metal islands in an ocean of death. Some still had survivors trapped inside calling for help. But no one could stop fighting long enough to mount rescue operations. Both sides knew this battle would decide the war. The winner would control the trade routes through this sector. The loser would face invasion of their home systems. There could be no retreat and no surrender. The asteroid field glowed with the light of burning ships and energy weapons. What had once been a peaceful region of space now looked like the surface of a dying star. The war had come to the stellar expanse, and neither side intended to leave. Without victory, as the battle raged on both, fleets prepared for the final assault that would determine which empire would rule this part of the galaxy. Lieutenant Yunho stared at his sensor screen in confusion. Something was wrong with the readings. A single ship signature appeared at the edge of his detection range, moving toward the battle. The computer showed impossible energy readings that did not match any known vessel type. He checked his instruments twice, thinking they were damaged from the fighting. But the readings stayed the same. One ship was approaching from the outer system. It was small compared to the massive fleets already engaged in combat. But its power signature made no sense. The young officer called to his captain. Captain Min-seok walked over to the sensor station while explosions continued to light up space around them. His experienced eyes studied the data with growing concern. In 30 years of military service, he had never seen readings like these. The ship was still too far away to get detailed scans. But its approach vector showed it was heading directly into the heart of the battle. No sane commander would fly a single vessel into the largest spacefight in galactic history, unless that commander had good reason to believe they could survive. On the Thel flagship, communications officer Hyrin noticed the same sensor anomaly. Her four-fingered hands danced across the control panel trying to get clearer readings. The mysterious ship was moving at speeds that should have torn any normal vessel apart. She reported her findings to Fleet Commander Zilmoth, who ordered all ships to scan the approaching vessel. Within minutes, dozens of sensor officers across both fleets were tracking the same impossible signature. The computer systems could not identify what type of ship it was. The energy readings suggested weapons and shields far beyond anything either empire had developed. The hull composition seemed to be made of materials that should not exist. Most disturbing of all, the ship showed no signs of damage despite traveling at such dangerous speeds. Engineer Wonshik, working deep in the Corvin destroyer, felt the vibrations change in the engine room. His instruments showed power fluctuations across the fleet communication network. Every ship was suddenly using maximum sensor power to scan the approaching vessel. He wondered what could be important enough to distract both fleets from the battle they had been fighting for hours. The war had been going on for 3 years. Nothing should be surprising anymore. But something was making even veteran commanders nervous. Captain Tae-hyung on his Thel battlecruiser watched the tactical display as the unknown ship continued its approach. His weapons officer asked for permission to target the vessel, but he hesitated. Something about the situation felt different from normal combat. The ship registry data finally came through on long-range communications. Lieutenant Yunho read the information and felt his 3 hearts stop beating. The letters on his screen seemed impossible. UHS Indomitable, Earth Confederacy Navy. He called out the identification in a voice that cracked with fear. Captain Min-seok grabbed the sensor console and read the data himself. The words were clear but terrifying. Humans. A human combat ship was approaching their battle. The news spread through the Corvin fleet faster than plasma fire. Ship-to-ship communications carried the message to every captain and crew member. Within minutes, 800 ships knew that humans were coming to the stellar expanse. Communications officer Soo-jin transmitted the alert to Corvin High Command while her hands shook. She had heard the stories about humans but never believed them to be true. No single species could be as dangerous as the legends claimed. On the Thel side, the reaction was the same. Captain Naeun received the transmission on her dreadnought and immediately ordered all weapon systems to defensive mode. Her crew looked at each other with expressions of growing fear. Pilot So-hyun, flying her fighter between the larger ships, heard the communication over her helmet radio. She almost crashed into an asteroid from shock. Every warrior in the galaxy knew the stories about human military forces. The tales were whispered in military academies across 100 worlds. Humans who fought with weapons that fired solid metal projectiles. Human soldiers who continued fighting even after taking wounds that would kill most species. Human ships that used ramming attacks as legitimate battle tactics. Fleet Commander Zilmoth called an emergency conference with his senior officers. The holographic images of 12 captains appeared around his command table. Each face showed the same expression of concern and disbelief. Admiral Vextar did the same on the Corvin flagship. His officers gathered in the war room while battle continued to rage outside. The topic of discussion was no longer their enemy fleet. Now they had to consider what to do about humans. The stories everyone remembered were terrifying. The siege of Proxima, where one human destroyer held off an entire pirate fleet for 6 days. The Battle of the Void Gates, where human marines boarded enemy vessels and fought room to room with nothing but kinetic weapons and determination. Commander, Jiwoo remembered intelligence reports about the Drexel incident. Human forces had been retreating from superior numbers when something changed. They turned their withdrawal into the most devastating counterattack in recorded military history. Captain Taehyung recalled testimonies from survivors of the Titan Nebula engagement. Humans had somehow turned a certain defeat into total victory by using tactics that no other species would consider. They treated impossible odds as normal operating conditions. The human ship continued its approach while both fleets tried to decide what to do. Communication channels filled with nervous chatter as officers shared stories and rumors about human military capabilities. Some tales seemed impossible, but too many came from reliable sources. Engineer Wan Shik heard crewmates talking about humans who could survive in vacuum for short periods without protection. Others mentioned human ships that continued fighting even after losing main power and life support systems. The UHS Indomitable was still hours away from reaching the battle zone, but its presence was already changing everything. Weapon targeting systems across both fleets began showing hesitation protocols. Computer algorithms designed for combat were adjusting for the presence of humans. Gunners found themselves checking and rechecking their equipment. Navigation officers started calculating retreat routes without being ordered to do so. Medical teams prepared for casualties that might be very different from normal battle wounds. Both admirals realized they were facing a completely new situation. The war between their empires suddenly seemed less important than the arrival of a single human vessel. History was about to change in ways no one could predict. The UHS Indomitable continued its steady approach toward the battle zone while both fleets struggled with growing panic. Ship computers across 1,400 vessels began displaying warning messages that had never appeared before. Tactical systems designed for normal warfare could not calculate proper responses to human involvement. Commander Jiwoo stood in his heavy cruiser command center watching probability matrices scroll across multiple screens. Every single calculation showed the same result. Engaging human forces would result in catastrophic losses regardless of numbers or tactical advantage. The computer recommended immediate withdrawal. His weapons officer stared at the targeting display in confusion. The automated systems kept cycling through different weapon configurations, trying to find something effective against human ships. Nothing in their database provided useful guidance for this situation. Captain Taehyung received similar warnings on his Thel battlecruiser. The artificial intelligence that normally provided tactical advice had gone silent. When pressed for recommendations, it simply stated that insufficient data existed to formulate battle plans against human military forces. The crew members around him exchanged worried glances. These were veteran warriors who had fought through the worst battles of the 3-year war. They had faced overwhelming odds and impossible situations, but none of them had ever seen their ship computers act like this. Lieutenant Yun-ho monitored communications channels as stories spread through both fleets. Veterans shared testimonies from other conflicts where humans had been involved. Each tale seemed more impossible than the last but came from sources that could not be dismissed. The siege of Proxima had become legend throughout the galaxy. A single human destroyer called the Defiant had held position against 67 pirate vessels for 6 standard days. The pirates had every advantage, including superior numbers and heavier weapons. But the human ship had used tactics that defied all military logic. Communications officer Su Jin found herself listening to recorded testimonies from Corvin officers who had witnessed human forces in action. One captain described watching human marines board an enemy vessel during combat. They had cut through the hull with handheld tools and fought their way to the bridge using only kinetic weapons. The enemy had energy shields and plasma weapons. The humans carried metal projectile rifles and explosive charges. By every tactical measure, the humans should have been slaughtered. Instead, they had captured the ship in less than 20 minutes. Engineer Wan Shik heard stories from maintenance crews about human engineering capabilities. Their ships could reportedly continue fighting even after losing main power systems. Human engineers could perform repairs under combat conditions that would be impossible for other species. One account described a human cruiser that had been cut in half by enemy fire. The forward section had somehow continued to fight independently, while the rear section provided covering fire. Both halves had survived until rescue arrived 3 days later. Captain Na Yun accessed classified intelligence files on her Thel dreadnought. The reports made for disturbing reading. Human soldiers could apparently function in vacuum for short periods without protective equipment. Their bones were dense enough to withstand impacts that would shatter other species. Medical reports suggested humans could survive wounds that would be immediately fatal to Corvin or Thel physiology. They seemed to possess redundant biological systems and an ability to continue fighting while severely injured. Some testimonies claimed humans became more dangerous when wounded. Pilot So-hyun reviewed flight data from encounters with human fighter craft. The performance specifications seemed impossible. Human pilots could withstand acceleration forces that would cause other species to lose consciousness. Their reaction times were measured in milliseconds rather than normal biological ranges. The Drexel incident had become required study material at military academies. Human ground forces had been in full retreat facing superior numbers and equipment. Something had triggered a change in their behavior that turned certain defeat into complete victory. Fleet Commander Zilmoth read the official report from Thel High Command. Human forces had stopped retreating and launched a counterattack that violated every principle of military science. They had divided their smaller force and attacked in 6 different directions simultaneously. The enemy had been caught completely off guard by tactics that should have resulted in the humans being surrounded and destroyed. Instead, the coordinated assault had shattered opposition forces that outnumbered them 4-1. The humans had achieved total victory in less than 2 hours. Admiral Vextar studied similar reports in his private quarters while the battle continued outside. The Battle of the Void Gates had involved human marines boarding fortified enemy positions. They had used crude weapons and improvised tactics against sophisticated defenses. The fortress had been considered impregnable with automated weapon systems and energy barriers. Human marines had somehow bypassed all defenses and fought through the installation room by room. They had captured the entire complex using nothing but determination and kinetic weapons. Captain Min Seok found his crew reluctant to maintain weapon locks on enemy targets. Gunners who had been fighting efficiently for hours now showed hesitation when engaging Thel ships. The presence of humans somewhere in the battle zone was affecting combat performance across both fleets. Communications Officer Hyrin noticed similar problems throughout the Thel formation. Ships that had been coordinating perfectly were now missing timing on joint attacks. Captains were requesting clarification on orders they would normally execute without question. The psychological impact of human involvement was spreading faster than any weapon could travel. Warriors who had shown courage throughout years of warfare were now second-guessing decisions they had made countless times. Before weapon systems across both fleets began showing power fluctuations as crews unconsciously avoided full commitment to attacks. Navigation officers started plotting course corrections that would provide escape routes if needed. Medical teams prepared for casualties they hoped would never come. The human ship was still hours away from reaching combat range. But its influence was already changing the nature of the conflict. The largest space battle in galactic history was being transformed by legends and stories that might or might not be true. Both admirals realized their carefully planned strategies were becoming meaningless. The arrival of humanity had introduced variables that no amount of tactical training could address. The war was about to enter completely unknown territory. Space twisted and bent as the UHS Indomitable dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly between the 2 massive fleets. The human ship appeared in a flash of blue energy that lit up the darkness like a small star being born. Reality seemed to hold its breath as the vessel settled into normal space. The ship was smaller than most capital vessels present in the battle zone. By galactic standards, it measured as a light cruiser with modest armor and standard weapon configurations. But its arrival sent shockwaves through both fleets that no weapon could match. Captain Min Seok stood frozen on his Corvin flagship bridge as sensor readings confirmed what everyone already knew. The humans had arrived at the worst possible moment. His fleet was spread out in attack formation with no room to maneuver. Retreat would be impossible under these conditions. Lieutenant Yun-ho watched his instruments with growing terror as the human ship moved with impossible grace between floating asteroids. The Indomitable avoided debris fields that should have required careful navigation. It flew through the maze of broken ships and space rocks as if following a predetermined path. On the Thel side, Captain Na-un gripped her command chair as her dreadnought shuddered from engine vibrations. Her crew had not moved the ship. The vibrations came from fear running through every deck and compartment. Warriors who had faced death countless times were trembling at the sight of one small human vessel. The UHS Indomitable moved with mechanical precision toward the center of the battle zone. No weapons were visible on its hull. No targeting systems locked onto enemy ships. The human vessel simply existed in the same space as 1,400 warships and somehow dominated them all. Communications Officer Sujin tried to maintain contact with other Corvin ships but found many channels filled with panicked chatter. Captains who had shown perfect discipline throughout the war were now requesting emergency instructions. Some ships were already powering down weapon systems without orders. Admiral Vextar realized his entire battle plan had become meaningless in the span of 30 seconds. The Corvin Empire had spent months preparing for this decisive engagement. Every ship position and attack vector had been calculated with perfect precision. Now none of it mattered because humans were present. Engineer Wan Shik felt the deck plates vibrating beneath his feet as his destroyer engines went to standby mode. The ship computer had automatically reduced power output when the human vessel appeared. Safety protocols designed to prevent accidents during first contact with unknown species had activated. Fleet Commander Zilmoth watched in disbelief as his most experienced captains began requesting permission to withdraw from combat. These were warriors who had never backed down from any fight. Some had commanded ships through battles against impossible odds. Now they wanted to retreat from a single human cruiser. The human ship broadcast on all communication frequencies using standard galactic translation protocols. The message was simple and polite. Captain Park of the Earth Confederacy Navy announced they were responding to distress calls from civilian populations in the sector. Captain Tae-hyung listened to the transmission with growing amazement. The human captain spoke as if the largest space battle in galactic history was a minor inconvenience. His tone suggested mild annoyance rather than concern about entering a combat zone with 1,500 hostile warships. The message continued with the request for all combatants to cease hostilities immediately. The words were phrased as a polite suggestion rather than a demand. But everyone who heard them understood the real meaning. The humans had arrived and fighting would now stop. Pilot So-hyun found her fighter squadron forming into non-threatening formations without receiving any orders. Her squadron mates were unconsciously moving their ships into positions that could not be interpreted as aggressive. The human presence was affecting decision-making at the most basic level. Communications Officer Hyerin watched her tactical display as power readings fluctuated across the entire Thel fleet. Ships were reducing weapon output and shifting to defensive configurations. The change was happening automatically as crew members responded to instincts they did not understand. Captain Minseok tried to maintain command authority but found his orders being questioned for the first time in his career. His weapons officer asked 3 times for confirmation before targeting enemy ships. His navigation officer kept suggesting course changes that would move them away from the human vessel. The UHS Indomitable continued broadcasting coordinates for refugee ships and medical assistance requests. Captain Park announced his crew would be conducting humanitarian operations in the sector for the next 6 hours. He thanked both fleets for their cooperation as if it had already been given. Engineer Wan Shik noticed his weapon systems had entered safe mode without authorization. The ship computer explained that safety protocols required all weapons to be secured when human vessels were present. The reasoning was based on statistical analysis of previous encounters. Captain Na-yun found herself unable to give orders to target the human ship. Every time she tried to speak the words, her throat closed up. Her tactical officer reported similar difficulties. The crew seemed physically incapable of treating humans as enemies. Admiral Vextar called an emergency conference with his senior staff, but found half of them recommending immediate withdrawal from the battle zone. Officers who had never shown fear were now openly discussing the futility of engaging human forces. The human ship moved through the battlefield like it owned the space around it. Debris from destroyed vessels drifted away from its path. Energy discharges from damaged ships seemed to bend around its hull. Reality itself appeared to be making room for humanity. Commander Jiwoo watched from his heavy cruiser as the Indomitable approached his position. The human ship passed within weapons range of his vessel, without showing any concern. Its crew apparently considered an entire Corvan battle group to be completely harmless. The psychological impact was devastating. 1,400 ships filled with veteran warriors found themselves unable to continue fighting in the presence of one small human vessel. The arrival of humanity had transformed the nature of warfare itself. What happened next would be recorded in galactic history books for thousands of years. The stellar expanse, which had echoed with the thunder of war for hours, suddenly fell completely silent. Weapon fire that had lit up space like artificial lightning simply stopped. Nearly 1,500 warships from 2 galactic superpowers ceased all combat operations in the span of 3 minutes. Energy cannons powered down across both fleets. Missile launchers went to safe mode. Fighter squadrons broke off from attack runs and formed defensive formations. Lieutenant Yunho stared at his sensor readings in amazement. The battle that had been raging since dawn was ending without victory or defeat. Ships that had been trying to destroy each other moments before now drifted, in space like sleeping giants. Captain Min Seok watched his tactical display, as yellow and red threat indicators changed to green. Across the entire battle zone, enemy ships were no longer showing hostile intent. His own vessels were responding the same way. The arrival of humans had somehow transformed enemies into confused bystanders. Communications Officer Su Jin monitored fleet channels as captains tried to understand what was happening to their crews. Experienced warriors found themselves unable to pull triggers when targeting systems locked onto enemy ships. Gunners reported strange hesitation when attempting to fire at Thel vessels. The phenomenon was happening throughout both fleets. Engineer Wan Shik discovered his weapon systems would not respond to firing commands. The ship computer reported all weapons were functioning normally, but declined to engage targets while human ships were present in the combat area. Captain Taehyung tried to maintain his attack on Corvan positions but found his crew unwilling to follow orders. His weapons officer kept asking for confirmation of targets that should have been obvious. His navigation officer suggested evasive maneuvers to avoid battles they had been winning. The UHS Indomitable moved through the silent battlefield like a shark swimming through a school of frightened fish. Captain Park continued his calm announcements about humanitarian operations while both fleets struggled to comprehend their situation. Pilot So-hyun attempted to resume her attack run on enemy capital ships but discovered her fighter squadron had formed a protective escort around damaged vessels instead. Her squadron mates were providing cover for rescue operations rather than continuing combat missions. The change in behavior was spreading through both fleets faster than any communication could travel. Ships that had been locked in deadly combat were now maintaining safe distances from each other. Targeting systems remained inactive even when enemy vessels presented perfect shots. Fleet Commander Zilmoth tried to rally his forces for a renewed attack, but found his orders being interpreted as defensive measures. When he commanded ships to engage enemy targets, his captains assumed he meant to protect civilian vessels. The human presence was changing the meaning of military language itself. Captain Na-eun watched from her dreadnought bridge as Corvan ships moved past her position without firing. Enemy vessels that had been trying to destroy her ship for hours now showed no interest in combat. The massive guns that could crack planets remained silent. Admiral Vexitar called for status reports from his fleet commanders and received responses that made no sense. Ships reported full combat readiness but could not engage enemy targets. Weapons showed green status lights but would not fire when ordered. Crews were following orders but not the ones being given. The silence that filled space was more profound than mere absence of sound. It was the quiet that comes when violence stops and peace takes its place. The stellar expanse had become a cemetery where wars came to die. Communications Officer Hai Rin noticed something remarkable happening on her long-range sensors. Ships from both fleets were beginning to coordinate rescue operations without being ordered to do so. Former enemies worked together to save survivors from damaged vessels. Engineer Wanshik left his engine room to help with medical emergencies and found Thel wounded being brought aboard his Corvan destroyer. The crew was treating enemy soldiers with the same care they showed their own people. The war had simply stopped existing in their minds. Captain Park announced the coordinates for emergency medical stations, and both fleets began responding, as if they had been waiting for such orders. Hospital ships from both sides moved to assist casualties without regard for their original allegiance. Commander Jiwoo found his heavy cruiser working alongside a Thel battleship to clear debris from a major shipping lane. The two vessels had been trying to destroy each other an hour earlier. Now their crews coordinated like they had trained together for years. The human captain's next transmission was delivered in the same calm tone he had used throughout his arrival. He thanked both fleets for their cooperation and announced that humanitarian operations would continue for the next 6 hours. Captain Minseok realized that Captain Park truly believed the fleets had chosen to stop fighting. The human commander seemed unaware that his mere presence had ended the largest space battle in galactic history. To him, this was apparently normal human procedure. The UHS Indomitable continued its methodical rescue operations while both fleets watched in fascination. Human crew members worked with casual efficiency as if stopping galactic wars was routine duty. They showed no surprise at the cooperation they were receiving from former enemies. Pilot So Hyun landed her fighter on a Corvin carrier to help with rescue operations. She worked alongside former enemies to save lives from both sides. The war that had defined her existence for 3 years had simply vanished like morning mist. Captain Tae-hyung authorized his battlecruiser to provide medical supplies to damaged Corvin vessels. His crew followed the orders without question, as if helping enemies had always been standard procedure. The human presence had rewritten the rules of warfare in their minds. The silence continued as both fleets adapted to their new reality. 1,500 ships drifted in formation around one small human cruiser that had accomplished what 3 years of fighting could not. Peace had arrived in the stellar expanse. In the hours that followed, both the Corvin Empire and Thel Confederation faced a truth that changed everything they understood about galactic power. They had spent 3 years fighting each other while ignoring the real apex predator that had been quietly expanding across the outer rim. Admiral Vextar and Fleet Commander Zilmuth met for the first time through holographic communication. Their ships remained within weapons range of each other, but the thought of resuming combat seemed impossible. The human presence had created a bubble of peace that neither commander wanted to break. The two military leaders who had been bitter enemies found themselves united by shared humiliation. Both had commanded massive fleets with enough firepower to destroy star systems. Both had been reduced to helpless observers by the arrival of one small human ship. Captain Minseok filed his preliminary report with Corvin High Command while watching human rescue teams work with mechanical efficiency. The humans treated wounded Corvin and Thel soldiers with equal care. They seemed genuinely confused when offered payment for their medical assistance. Lieutenant Yunho monitored communications as both fleets began discussing peace terms. Captains who had been trying to kill each other hours earlier were now coordinating joint operations. The war that had seemed permanent was ending because everyone had suddenly remembered there were more dangerous things in the year. Galaxy. The UHS Indomitable continued its humanitarian mission with casual professionalism that amazed everyone watching. Captain Park moved through the disaster zone like he had done this thousands of times before. His crew worked with the kind of efficiency that only came from extensive practice. Communications Officer Su Jin listened to reports from across both fleets as the scope of human capability became clear. The rescue teams carried medical equipment that was decades ahead of anything either empire produced. Their techniques saved lives that should have been lost. Engineer Won Shik worked alongside human technical specialists who repaired damaged systems with tools he did not recognize. They fixed problems in minutes that should have required hours of work. Their casual conversation revealed technology that both empires considered theoretical. Captain Tae-hyung received intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture of human expansion. While the Corvin Empire and Thel Confederation had wasted resources fighting each other, humans had been quietly building an interstellar civilization that dwarfed both powers. The Earth, Confederacy-controlled territories that stretched across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their population numbered in the hundreds of billions. Their industrial capacity could produce fleets that would make the current battle look like a minor skirmish. Captain Na Yin read classified assessments that estimated human military strength at levels that seemed impossible. If the reports were accurate, humanity could field enough ships to outnumber both empires combined. The Indomitable was apparently one of their smaller vessels. Pilot So Hyun helped evacuate survivors from a damaged Corvin cruiser and was amazed by the human rescue equipment. Their medical scanners could detect injuries through solid metal. Their transportation devices could move patients safely through vacuum without protective suits. The human crew members she worked with treated the rescue operation as routine duty. They mentioned similar missions on dozens of worlds across human space. Apparently, stopping wars and saving lives was what humans did when they encountered conflicts. Fleet Commander Zilmoth reviewed intelligence reports that had been ignored during the 3-year war. Human settlements existed on thousands of worlds that both empires had considered uninhabitable. Their terraforming technology could create garden worlds from barren rocks. Admiral Vextar studied economic data that showed human trade networks spanning half the galaxy. Their merchant ships traveled routes that both empires considered too dangerous to attempt. Pirates and raiders avoided human vessels with the same fear shown by military forces. Captain Park completed his mission reports with characteristic human understatement. He described the incident as a minor diplomatic success where local conflicts had resolved themselves. His logs made no mention of ending the largest space battle in galactic history. Communications Officer Hyarin monitored human communications and discovered they were coordinating rescue operations across 7 star systems simultaneously. The Indomitable was part of a humanitarian fleet that made both warring empires look insignificant. Commander Jiwoo received new orders from Corvin High Command, recommending immediate diplomatic contact with the Earth Confederacy. Similar messages were being sent throughout both fleets as political leaders realized the balance of galactic power had shifted permanently. Engineer Won Shik helped human technicians repair a damaged Thel destroyer and learned they carried spare parts for ships they had never seen before. Their universal repair systems could fix technology from any known civilization. The rescue operations continued for the promised 6 hours while both fleets adapted to their new understanding of the galaxy. Ships that had been enemies began working together under human supervision. Former rivals shared resources and information freely. Captain Minseok watched the UHS Indomitable prepare to leave the system and realized this was probably considered a minor mission by human standards. They had ended a 3-year war and saved thousands of lives as part of routine patrol duties. Both admirals began planning the withdrawal of their fleets from the stellar expanse. The region that had been a battlefield was now under unofficial human protection. Neither empire wanted to risk provoking humanity by continuing their war. The peace talks that followed would reshape the political structure of the galaxy. The Corvin Empire and Thel Confederation signed treaties that created buffer zones around human space. Both governments established diplomatic missions to Earth within months of the incident. Captain Park filed his final report as the Indomitable jumped to faster-than-light travel. He noted the successful completion of humanitarian operations and recommended the area for regular patrol missions. The galaxy would never be the same. The Stellar Expanse incident became a turning point in galactic history, not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple demonstration that humans existed and could project power anywhere they chose. Wars became diplomatic negotiations when humanity might be watching. The lasting image was of 1,500 warships drifting, silent in space while humans quietly saved lives and repaired the damage that others had caused. It was the moment when humanity became the galaxy's reluctant peacekeepers through reputation alone.